Don't say any bad words.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our October. I had to think, what month is it? October book discussion about W.A. Evans' Mrs. Lincoln. I am going to turn, yes, thank you, Pam. That's the book. There, Darren's got it too. Mine is on the shelf. I'm going to turn it over to Darren, who graciously agreed to lead this discussion tonight, to take a little pressure off of us. So thank you, Darren, for that and for all the work you put into it. And
you're welcome.
It's all you.
I've never been a moderator, especially on the night of a presidential debate. So this is kind of fun. So
Should we just all talk over you? Can we?
Yes. Yes.
We'll just interrupt whenever we feel like throwing something in. I think we already do that anyway. So
yeah, in my classroom, I was just like, don't worry about raising your hand. Just ask a question because, well, first of all, I don't know names, so I'd never know my students' names. When I started going through this, there's so much there. And I thought, how many times have we talked about Mrs. Lincoln this summer and dissected her, bisected her? I mean, we were all W.A. Evans with her this summer and well, starting in the late spring. And so I thought just finding one area, and I found it in the discussion between Dr. Barton, Dr. Reverend Barton, and Evans. And they were talking one night, he was talking about President Lincoln. And then he said, they started discussing Mrs. Lincoln. And so finally he said, Barton said to Evans, why don't you do a study or write a book on Mrs. Lincoln? And Evans was kind of like, first, and then he really got into it. I think it's 5 years to write the book. His sister was right alongside him. She went down to Lexington at one point and scoured everything that she could on the Todd family, on Mrs. Lincoln. And fortunately, Catherine was still living and was Emily still living when he started writing it?
Emily died in 1930.
And he published this in 32.
So she was still living when he started it.
Okay, great. Because, I mean, he still had access to people who actually knew Mrs. Lincoln. And the thing that Jason pointed out in the foreword was that this book still remains one of the top books that researchers go to for their research on Mrs. Lincoln. And he pointed out that even though we're learning newer things now since the papers of Robert Todd and the notes from Herndon were all released after the publication of this book, there are newer things that we're still learning, but this is still the foundation. And it was really the first in-depth study of Mrs. Lincoln that was ever conducted. I looked it up now, I've already forgotten it. This was like the fourth or fifth book at the time written on a full biography written on a first lady. They just weren't, there were newspaper and journal articles, but as far as anybody doing a full range book, this was pretty leading. The thing I really became fascinated with Evans, and he was on the national team that led all the public on the 1918 pandemic. The thing I love the most, the three things they focus on: distancing, wearing masks, and quarantining. And I thought, oh, we've not really changed all that much. But I just thought that was fascinating, since I'm like, oh my gosh, this tied Dr. Evans in with us and made him even more personal to me. Now, Dr. Evans' question that was gnawing at his brain when he started his research was what kind of influence, how much influence, and what was the influence that Mrs. Lincoln potentially had on the president. He was fascinated with her mind and how, just what really drove the lady. So when I decided to go with his lead on influence, I thought it would help us if we looked at the influences on Mrs. Lincoln, the people, the events. As a teacher, I'm a firm believer in the chain effect. There's me, there's the teachers before me, their teachers, and it keeps going. And now I've got students and students. I've got great grand students right now, which is really scary because they're in their 30s. So I thought, no, finding out what made Mrs. Lincoln tick from her influences. How was she influenced? Who influenced her? So the first section is from 1818, her birth, up to 1839 when she left permanently for Springfield. So who are some of the people that influenced her up through that time?
Her grandmother Parker.
Yep.
Grandma Humphreys,
Yes.
Henry Clay,
Henry Clay. Yep.
Her cousin Elizabeth
Yep.
Yes.
and her siblings, of course.
oh, Elizabeth Norris.
Yeah.
Okay. Too many Elizabeths.
Yeah, there is way too many. Well, they repeat the same name over and
Yeah.
over.
Charlotte Mantell.
Yep. Else.
Yeah, Madame Chantal.
Monsieur Geron. My French is terrible, but the French baker.
Baker,
Oh, yeah.
who did sugar confections.
And she
Well-
practiced her French with him.
Mhm.
Yes.
Her mother and her stepmother.
Right. Even though Betsy had more of a probably negative impact on her, she still had an influence.
Right.
And I often wonder if that also led to Mary being the mother that she was for her four. I don't want to be anything like Betsy. Because, I mean, she was what, 5 when her mother died? 6?
6.
6. Yeah.
I mean, and with all those other kids in the house, I mean, how much attention did Mary get? Is there anybody
Also-
else? Oh, go ahead.
Yes. She's also very influenced by Robert and Hannah Todd. That is her father's sister,
Sister.
and I'm sorry, Hannah Todd Stewart.
Okay.
Robert Stewart, Reverend Robert Stewart, and his wife Hannah Todd. Mary spent quite a bit of time with them as a child at their place, and was very close to their daughters.
Yeah. Okay. Wait a minute. Where did they live again?
They live, oh gosh, right outside of Lexington. Beech Grove, isn't it? Is it Beech Grove?
Yeah.
Walnut Grove. He was the Presbyterian minister at Walnut Grove Presbyterian Church.
Walnut Grove.
Yeah.
Walnut Grove, isn't that from Little House on the Prairie?
You got it, half pint. Yeah.
Well, I'm pretty sure it was Walnut Grove. Maybe I better look it up.
No, I'm sure it is. I just never made the correlation until right this second. It's like, boing.
Now I have two
Well,
two
look it
more
up.
people on the list from
Didn't-
1818 to
Didn't
1835.
Mary,
Go ahead, Jeanette.
yeah, didn't Mary spend some time with Betsy's mother, or was it the grandmother in
Yeah, that's Grandma
Frankfurt?
Humphreys.
That's the French lady. That's why she liked her French.
That's Grandma Humphreys.
Mhm.
There's two more people I believe that influenced her.
Go ahead.
It is not Walnut Grove. It is Walnut Hills.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
You just had Little House on the Prairie in your head too.
Believe. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm looking in a not real. I'm not looking in Helm, and I don't see my Helm book here, so.
How dare you be wrong? Oh,
I know, I very well could be. I don't see Helm anywhere.
Do you know how to mute her button? I mean, she has like
Who, me?
5 minutes timeout. Okay. Who else? There were two that I believe really influenced her also.
Mamie? I mean, Mammy?
Mammy Sally.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot.
Yeah, especially, helping with what was it, the Underground Railroad then still?
Mhm.
That's
Or
not
when
a
they-
true story.
Oh,
That's
it's not?
Nope, it's not.
Mammy Sally never gave
Nope.
food.
Nope. Did not happen.
So
Donna,
how did that?
where does it come from then? Do you know?
Yeah, it comes from a story that that Emily told in her book, where there's a knock on the door late at night and they're asking Mammy who it is. And Mammy tells them this big story about how it could be a runaway slave. Notice the words could be. Well, for all we know, it was Mammy Sally's boyfriend sneaking in after hours. We don't know who it was. And it was a story, like I said, it was a story Mammy was telling Elizabeth, later Norris, and Mary. And Elizabeth said in her letter to Emily, we never heard the knock again.
Oh,
Wasn't there a deal about Mammy putting some sort of notches or something on the gate to let runaways know that they could get some food there?
Yeah, that's fabricated by Jean Baker.
Okay.
Just another thing that we can discuss when we talk about the Baker book in January.
I mean, there might be a little bit of stuff in the Helm book, but the big story came from Baker.
Yeah, who else might we find as an influence to her? Think education.
Well, I was going to say Dr. John Ward.
yeah,
That's what I have.
Dr.
I was
Ward.
trying to think of the name. I couldn't come up with the name.
Yeah,
Ward's Academy.
his building is still standing. I forget what street it is. But anyway, okay. Any events that might have influenced her during 1818 to 1839?
Mother's death,
Mhm,
obviously.
obviously, and father's remarriage.
Yeah,
Probably the birth of her siblings and step siblings,
yeah.
especially Anne, because that kind of took her name.
Yes, ticked her off big time.
I guess we could say Mary's birth, but that's kind of a given. What about the move from Short Street to Main Street?
To Main Street. That probably had a big effect on her.
Why would that have a big effect on her?
Well, I mean, she's going from her mother's family home
Hmm.
to somebody else's family home. I don't know. To me, Mary was a very needy child back then to me. And the attention she craved just wasn't there. And I don't know, it would bother. I know my kids were bothered when we moved
Yeah.
from the house they were born in and we came to Illinois. It took them a long time to get past losing all their friends or whatever. I mean, they were still in the same town, but still, I think it's an adjustment that's hard for some kids. And I see Mary probably having a little bit more difficulty than others.
Does anyone think that the move might have affected Mary because she didn't have Grandma Parker right there
Yeah.
to kind of oversee things? I mean, anything else?
I think the cholera epidemic affected her.
Mhm.
what was that, 32, 33?
Yeah.
I mean,
what-
they left Springfield and went out to wherever that was they went.
Didn't they go to their country home?
They went to somebody else's. It was like what was it called? Crabtree Orchard or
Yes. Crab Orchard Creek
I
or
don't
something
think
like
the
that.
Todds- I don't think the Todds owned that. I don't know who owned it.
Oh, I always thought that they owned it.
I see their country home was Buena Vista,
Mhm.
Mhm.
up towards Frankfurt.
Frankfurt.
Yeah. Oh, for some reason, I always thought that they owned that property down at Crab Orchard. I think it's Crab Orchard Creek or something like that.
Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
really not sure who owned it.
But
I've not
was it?
found it in tax records. Although I'm not exactly 100% sure where it's located.
Crab Orchard?
Yeah.
I looked it up one time because I
Where is
wanted to go. It's, if I remember correctly, kind of southwest of Lexington.
Do you know what county it's in?
Oh heck, I don't even know what county I'm in half the time.
Okay. Because see, when I look up tax records, it's by county.
Okay, I'll make a note of that to look. I saw a photograph of the house. I mean, it was dilapidated and everything, and that's what made me think that it was. Now, was this when this cholera epidemic went through? Was this the one where she could hear the wheels of the wagons collecting the dead bodies?
Had to have been because the next cholera epidemic
She
is
wasn't
she's
there.
in Springfield. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if I was getting it mixed up with Les Mis or what. Same time period. Do
And-
you hear the people died? I don't know.
And is this I don't remember, but is that the same place where the Indians walked by and she was scared and hid in the fireplace?
Yes.
Or did that happen at Walnut Hills?
Oh,
See, I can't remember where she was, but that's another trauma for her.
I was gonna
Yeah.
say, do you not think that incident right there was a lot behind her description of her migraines, the Indians pulling wires and things like this, that was a correlation that she, I mean, but she was also such an avid reader. Was she reading, books of like what was the book that Mr. Lincoln was so fond of, Black Hawk or whatever? She may have even read that and hearing how they tortured people and treated people, it might have mentally affected her to make
Well,
that correlation. Because I know my mom made the same comments about her migraines. And she said felt like wires were being pulled from her eyes. They hurt so bad. So,
well,
kinda
of course, they were still on the frontier at this time.
oh yeah,
We're not too far removed from Daniel Boone.
that's true.
So I mean, the Indians were just right outside the borders there. My great second or third great grandparents, wherever their cabin was, their home was, their farm was in central Indiana, they also worried about the Native Americans there. They all there was a big trail that passed through 5 of our family farms, with the Miami Indians and something else and something else and something else. They were always there. Now they were friendly, but in one of the letters that my great grandmother wrote to she was like, we never know when they might attack us.
Well,
So
and
there was still that fear in the 1870s. Someone was saying something.
well, I was just going to say that, her grandfather was a general during the Indian Wars,
Mhm.
and his brother was killed at Blue Lick,
Mhm.
and her father fought he was in some military situations. And yeah, and I mean, her
Was that
grandfather
before Betsy?
what?
Was that before Betsy?
This was before Eliza. This was before Eliza. Yeah. And so actually there's a discrepancy according to a historian whose name I will not say, but she comments that Elizabeth really cannot be Robert Smith Todd's daughter because of where he was during his military career, which is ridiculous, but
She, okay, I'm trying to think which biographer was a she that would have said that.
Jean?
That's kind of like Mary and Abe. It's like they had sex out of wedlock. And it's like, oh my God, why do you guys go there? You know, why do people go there? Why is that so important? It just drives me crazy.
Every couple connected with this, Mary and Abraham, and also Thomas and Nancy. People say, oh, Abe is not Thomas's. Well, he's got Sarah was born first.
Yeah. That's his older sister.
Right.
Now, are there any other events that may have impacted her?
Oh God, so many.
Rolling in Mentel's. Did you say
Yes.
that one?
No, not yet.
Okay.
And I have three more items, but they all kind of connect.
Well, just going away from her home just because she needed to be away from the situation.
Yeah.
That in itself just screams to me how sad she was. And I don't know if she really was that sad or if she just thought she was that sad. I mean, she was still a young kid, and when she first started at Ward's Academy, and then went on to Madame Mentel's, but that's a bold step for her to beg to please let her stay, even though she was only 1.5 miles away from home. And they allowed her to do that. So they understood the situation, but there were umpteen freaking kids in there. Hello.
Well, you've also got the 1837 trip to Springfield with
Yes.
Francis,
Yeah.
To go visit married sister Elizabeth.
Now, I had 3 other events listed,
Go for it.
and they were the elections of 1828, 1832, and 1836.
Right.
With her father being a campaign manager for, is that true still? I think I got that one out of Miss Baker. I mean, she obviously had a strong political mind. She was
Oh, yeah.
influenced, I think, in her home. It was a political gathering place. So I think
don't think-
those.
I don't think she liked Andrew Jackson.
Mm-mm, mm-mm,
No, I don't think she did either.
no,
But I think she marched in a parade for General Lafayette, didn't she?
Oh, I do.
that would have been what, 1828.
She would have been a little person, 10 years old.
She could have. I know he was.
Well,
I
she
know-
was infatuated with Henry Clay, so, I mean, she got in an argument with one of her friends.
As far as Lafayette, that could be possible because in
Mhm.
1828 he came back to the United States and went on a tour and was feted everywhere. Okay, anything else from the Lexington years?
What
Before
about this might seem a little off the wall, but
You're talking to me.
I was interested in when the telegrams started. That must have been really mysterious and weird for people. And I think they started in I was looking it up, and it was she was 8 or 10, and I bet her parents were well off, so they would maybe get telegrams. And it's that seems really mysterious. It's like who could have thought of the internet kind of thing.
Mhm.
Well, the train coming to Lexington.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Technology just seems to really start changing at that time.
Another event, and it didn't really happen in Lexington, but when Mary was young, there was that story in the in the newspapers about the slaves in New Orleans. I forgot the name of the family, but the house was on fire and they found the bodies of the slaves chained together, locked in the attic.
Yeah.
Mm,
And that deeply affected Mary.
yeah, yeah. I forgot about that. Thank you for a reminder.
Yeah.
Is she-
You know, and you what? How old was she then? About 8, 9, 10?
Something like that. Well, Elizabeth was living with the Todd family. Elizabeth Humphreys was living with the
Humphreys.
Todd family at that time. So she might have been a little bit older.
So, you know, you
Yet she
wonder,
was living in
okay,
hotels.
okay. But doesn't it make you wonder, oh, that could have been my Mammy Sally
Right.
who died in that.
She seemed like a sponge, you know, like absorbing everything around her.
Yeah.
That like
And then
absorbing it.
wore everything on her sleeve with her emotions, and then would take her fan and just fan it about. I think this is a crew it's okay to say this with, but there are sometimes I think I'm almost too sympathetic. And, you know, there are times when someone says something and I just gristle. And I have to forget that I know a completely different side of this woman that's been portrayed throughout history.
Mhm. I think we all tend to bristle when somebody criticizes
Yes.
her or assumes that, you know, she was mean to Mr. Lincoln. He wasn't a charmer to live with either. You know, he was very, very maudlin and very withdrawn. And, you know, it's like that has to be somebody that's hard to live with when you're so out there.
Yes.
You know, she's so, but she's the yin to his yang. And, you know, and they
Yeah.
worked well together as a couple. She taught him manners that he never had. I mean, she worked well with him and he worked well with her.
And she had, upon that marriage, she had such an entirely different world thrust upon her. Cooking, cleaning, all these other things, mending socks, taking care of babies full time, maybe
And she-
with a hired girl or without a hired girl. So, I mean, it was, I think that was a big shock. I think that was probably, even though she loved being a wife and mother, I think there was still some trauma there with the adjustments. Leaving Aristocracy Hill
Mm-hmm.
and going down to the Globe. So, okay, for 1839, she's in Springfield now.
Mhm.
1839 up to her marriage in November of 42. Who are some of the people that had a strong influence on her or who influenced her?
Mercy Leverling.
Woohoo! Yep.
Big one.
Mhm.
Dr. John Todd.
Yeah.
Dr. John Todd.
Julia Jane,
Yep.
Joshua Speed.
Yeah.
Yep.
William Herndon.
Oh, be nice. I think they got along enough, but until he wrote a stupid book and then she lost her shit.
That was one of our rabbit holes last time.
She got really a little ticked off about that book, you know, and I
I-
don't blame her.
I think the not yet to be named grandson of Patrick Henry
Oh,
Yes.
very good.
Mm-hmm.
and cousin Ann, Uncle David out in Missouri.
In Columbia.
Yes.
Reverend Dresser.
Francis, Elizabeth, their husbands.
Reverend John Smith.
Oh, I've lost their names. I'm having a senior moment. The people who own the newspaper, Simeon Francis.
Francis,
Simeon.
Oh, okay.
Francis.
Oh, I just put newspaper owner. I couldn't remember
Yeah.
who they were.
Simeon and Eliza Francis? Is it Eliza?
I don't remember.
Can't remember.
Now,
I talk about her in my presentation.
we're leaving out one.
Elizabeth and Ninian Edwards.
Yeah. Those are the first on my list.
I said those. Mm.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear.
That's okay. That's okay. We're all talking over each other, you know.
Oh, it's a debate.
Yes.
Helen Edwards.
Yes.
Oh,
And
yes.
Ben.
Yes. Thank you. I couldn't think of his first name.
Her. What about another sister and husband?
Francis and
Wallace's.
William.
I said them too.
Yep.
Yes. Oh,
William Baker.
Fine. Nobody listens to me. Fine.
he was a judge and a senator.
Oh,
Oh, Stephen Douglas.
Stephen Douglas.
I'm sitting across from him. I should know who you're talking about.
Right?
I know. He's sitting right here. For those of you who don't know, my husband has portrayed Stephen Douglas occasionally.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
Edwin Webb.
Edwin Webb,
Yes.
the widower.
Shields.
James Shields, the Irishman. Yes.
Until
Her,
he got pinned.
her suitor list read like
Quite
the who's
impressive.
who. Yeah, it was impressive. I mean, these weren't Lincoln really wasn't one to brag about at the time, but I've always loved, and I've been excited about the fact that when you're a teacher, you can look at a student and the student's just not performing up to par or whatever. But as a teacher, you can see beyond that and see the potential there, and you almost picture where that student is. It's for me, it's like Annie Sullivan being at the well with Helen Keller, and Helen Keller remembers this is water. She had Stephen Douglas, Patrick Henry's nephew,
Grandson.
grandson, sorry. Webb, Shields, Douglas. And she picked Abraham Lincoln, the least of all candidates in her circle that would give her her MRS degree. She saw something there. And whether it's true or not, but the one comment someone said, she goes, well, I wouldn't have married him if I didn't think he would be president.
Mhm. That was her aspiration.
Yeah.
Her
You know.
cousin, Stephen Logan, referred to Lincoln as the rough diamond from Kentucky.
Yes.
Rough diamond from Kentucky.
Yeah. I think right there is one of the pivotal moments in the foundation of how she influenced Lincoln and the influence she had on him. Can you imagine being Lincoln and, oh my God, that cute little number up on Aristocracy Hill on Monroe Street in Second? She likes me. She's interested in what I have to say. And
And it scared him.
yeah, I'm sure. I mean, it would be like, yeah, I don't know what it would be like, but it was, the poor guy was just like, nah. And
I hope he wasn't like that.
well, we don't know now, do we? Since he had a thin, reedy voice, it would have been more like, but anyway, and then he's like going, oh my gosh, not only is there Mary, but she's from the Todds of Kentucky where they use 2 Ds and God only uses 1. So, I mean, if we think he was going up against a lot right there, that would be like me showing up at the gates of Buckingham Palace and asking if Liz is home. It's like, sorry, go somewhere. But I mean, Stephen Douglas. And what was her reason for turning away Stephen Douglas? Or turning down Stephen Douglas, if there ever was really a proposal? Politics.
Politics.
Democrat.
Right. You're a Democrat. I'm a Whig.
I liked him well enough, but he was a Democrat.
Yes. And I love that.
And he was short.
Now that probably didn't matter.
Oh, I can see over your head now.
I don't know.
Now, what were some events between 1839 and 1842 that would have had an influence on Mary?
The duel.
The duel, yes.
I think one of the biggest ones was her trip to Missouri,
hmm
Mhm.
because she really debated whether or not to come back.
Think just how different history would have turned out. If she'd have stayed in Columbia, would we even be sitting here tonight discussing her? Or would there have been an Abraham Lincoln in the White House?
I don't think so. I
Maybe
think she was,
Patrick Henry's grandson would have been in the White House.
yeah, could have been. Whoever she ended up with, I think she would have tried to do a little arm twisting. She had her aspirations, you know, and she wasn't going to settle for anything less if she could keep from it.
Yeah, but I mean, Lincoln had aspirations too. I don't think
Right.
he had to twist his arm very hard, if at
But
all.
he really never really, to me, never sought for the presidency. He was wanting to be a senator
Yeah,
because senators make laws. And she had to tell him, but the president can pass the law or not pass the law. He has the power. They have the power to create them, but it's up to the president to put it into play. And so
I think once he lost the Senate race, he got the ambition himself
Yeah.
to become
Yes.
president.
you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do, yeah.
That was a stepping stone for him.
Yeah.
You
It-
know,
it
I
was a
think
huge-
that with Mary knowing so many of the important men and friends of her father, and she could observe what all the politicians were saying and all of that. I think she kind of had a sharp image of what a man's personality was.
Mhm. And with her intelligence, she knew how a man thought. And I honestly believe that made it so much easier for her, and I hate to use the word, manipulate.
Mhm.
And
We manipulate. We know we do as women.
Well-
we can and do.
well, yes, but we all do.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have different approaches.
Yeah.
Where some, and I think this is where some of the things maybe from neighbors and townspeople of Springfield, when they talk about how she treated Lincoln and everything, I think it was not so much that as, so I don't believe the stories of her chasing him with a knife. I don't believe the one of her taking a chunk of wood and hitting him on the nose. That doesn't seem to be characteristic of anything before or after in her story of being abusive. Now, we also have to look at a different way of what that time. I mean, I could see her taking Robert and grabbing him by the arm and smacking his butt. I think probably all of us grew up in an era that was still doing that. I was. But I don't believe any of those. And I often wonder, was it the way she thought, the way she spoke, the way she could convince Lincoln or insist or manipulate that made others look at her like, ooh, she's a nasty woman?
well, one thing I'll say is people don't remember the everyday, quiet, calm, just normal life. People remember either the highs or the lows. So
Yeah.
if something like an argument happened, whether probably not chasing with a knife, maybe, but maybe they were having an argument and somebody saw it, they're going to think back and go, remember that time? And, things get changed over time. But those are the things people remember, that one day, not the, 300 days of the year that they were happy. So I think that's where some of the stories maybe of her being, a nagging wife or an abusive wife. I mean, that's ridiculous. But I think that's where some of those stories come from, is that's what gets remembered, unfortunately.
Well, that's just like the news today. I mean,
Right.
you're only going to see the bad stuff in the newspaper. You're not going to see the good stuff, which, I've preached and preached that if the newspapers would start accentuating the good things that people do, I think we might be in a better mood on a daily
Yeah.
basis, especially with our kids or whatever. It's time to start pointing out the kids that are doing good, and the kids
Thank
that are doing
you.
bad do not need any recognition. And you can point to what's going on tonight. This president, and I don't want to go there, but that's his technique, is to step over and do something to make somebody irritated. So, he knows you're going to talk about him. And that's what I think we spend too much time talking about the bad and not enough talking about the good, about these people, Mary and Abraham Lincoln.
Mhm.
And
I have a different take on it. See, I don't see these negative stories coming out until after Lincoln has died.
Yeah.
And the story about the knife that was given to Herndon, and I can't remember who quoted the story.
Mrs. Sprague,
Who?
Mrs. Sprague across the street.
Oh,
I thought it was a man.
Well, she was the gossip according to the park. She was kind of like the neighborhood gossip.
Well, there's someone who in the interview with Herndon said that he didn't know for sure who it was, but he thought he saw a woman somewhere near the Lincoln home chasing a man with a knife.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, and therefore, historians have said, oh, it must be Abraham and Mary.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
as far as the cracking him on the nose, I can actually see that happen.
I can too. And he did have a mark, they said, from his.
Well,
whatever.
it's very simply, I told you to put this wood on the fire here, and tossing it to him, and he misses it and it hits him in the nose.
Yep.
Yep.
It could be a very simple
And he
thing.
did have a rather large nose too. I mean, where it could have been, oh, I didn't get my perspective right.
Exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was aiming for your hand, not your head. Yeah. I mean,
I can see. Yeah. I've never thought that Mary was a physical type of a person. I've never seen her as that kind of an aggressive soul.
Right, in that way.
Yeah, I mean, was she verbally sharp? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm sure she was. I am. I see a lot of myself in her.
She spoke her mind.
She did, and she
I mean, she didn't hold
spared
back.
no words. I mean, she spared nothing.
she was the typical Scots-Irish woman. And as a friend of mine, and I quote him frequently, Scots-Irish women are earthy, bawdy, and brutally honest.
I like that,
And that's Mary.
and that is Mary to a T. I still laugh at Irish, Scotch Irish. Just kind of goes, whoa, that's a little conflict of interest.
Okay. Now, between 1839 and 1842, what were some of the other events that had an impact or an influence on Mrs. Lincoln?
Robert Burr.
Engagement, and then
Like-
not engagement, and then engagement, and then marriage.
Married.
The whole family entanglement there with
Yeah. And the Edwardses were involved with that. They didn't like Lincoln. That's my understanding initially. But when they split, it was Elizabeth who got them back together. So that was a big influence there.
Well, she saw how miserable everybody was.
What about the election of 1840?
Was that the last? No. What was the last year Henry Clay ran? That election affected her, but I can't remember what year that was.
I don't know. I can't remember. I'll look it up.
Remember either. Can you imagine? You've got this tall, dark, not as handsome guy that you're courting. You love politics. He loves politics. That's a match made in Springfield. I mean, it is just I can just see that excitement between the two. Of course, when Elizabeth said I would happen into the parlor and see Lincoln mesmerized by Mary yapping away and everything, I bet anything when they were talking politics, I bet it was a blast. I could just see them having, and I don't always see them agreeing, even though they were both Whigs. I could see her, well, no, have you looked at it this way? And then when we get to that part, okay, then the marriage and then the move to Globe Tavern. That just sounds, okay, moving on to 1843, 1860. I almost broke this down into chunks,
Hey,
but
Don.
I'm, pardon?
I was gonna say the last election for Henry Clay was in 44. And that's when he ran against Polk.
Yes.
Wow.
I couldn't remember
Yeah.
either. Yeah, so.
Hmm.
And that did have, because that's three and out.
Mhm.
Just think of Joe Biden. This is his third run for the presidency. I hope
Now-
it doesn't end up the same way.
What I did for the people from 1843 to 1860, I just put everybody above because they stayed in her sphere for quite some time. So who were some of the new folks on the scene?
Kids.
Kids. Yeah.
Kids. Glorious kids. There was a lot of loss though during that time too.
Yes.
Yeah. We'll
Yeah.
get to that.
Yeah.
The move to Washington.
Well, not yet. That's
No, when he was a congressman.
Congressman,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
they all went first and then she gave up. Two
Mhm.
kids in one room was not a fun
And-
thing to
But where
do.
did they
End up
visit
Lexington.
first? Lexington. Yeah.
Lexington.
Yes, they stopped off.
Wasn't it brother or cousin of Betsy Humphreys that talked about these kids on the train that were so misbehaved
That's
and
the
they're
funniest story ever. I love that
Yeah.
story.
And then it was the
Betsy-
Lincoln boys.
And it was the Lincoln boys.
It was Betsy's nephew, Joseph Humphrey.
Joseph Humphreys, yeah. That was too, that's the best story ever.
Someone we haven't mentioned yet, but should have been mentioned in the last set was John Todd Stewart and his family.
Mm.
Oh, yeah,
I had him on there on my list.
yeah.
Yep, that was.
The Black Hawk War affected that whole, yeah, relationship.
And anybody new on the scene between 1843 and 1860?
Hannah Scheer,
And a share?
Valerie, the lady, or Pam, one of you, the lady that lived across the street,
Oh,
Dillman,
Dillman.
Oh, the Dillman?
the Dillmans.
Mhm.
Were they the ones, the boys who inherited Eddie's clothes?
Maybe.
Can't remember.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about, but yeah.
Yeah, I did too, but I
remember.
can't remember the name. in
Because
that
they
whole-
had the boys had their pictures taken wearing Eddie's clothes, which
I
was
Yeah.
thought
probably
that was
Robert's
the
hand.
Riemann, the Riemann.
Freeman,
Yeah,
yeah,
it was
yeah.
the Remans.
It was
Yeah.
Remans, yeah.
Josie's
it was
brothers,
Gosh.
right?
Because one of Elizabeth's, I think it was one of Elizabeth's sons married one of the Riemann girls.
Josie.
Remans.
Yeah.
So I really didn't have anybody else because this is where everything was swirling with even more politics.
Well, 1843 to 1860, you have the death of Papa and the death of Grandma Parker.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and move over to events. Grandma Parker, Papa,
Eddie.
Eddie,
Eddie.
all within 7 months or 10 months?
Someone else.
No. Henry Clay died.
Yeah, there you go, Clay.
Oh, Henry Clay, yeah, 18, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when did grandmother Humphreys die?
Oh, 1839, I think.
Okay. Okay.
or 30,
What else?
30 something.
We've had this, and I think Elizabeth lost a child or two during.
Yeah, she lost a couple. Well, her first child was born in Lexington, Kentucky and died in Lexington, Kentucky.
Oh, wow. I guess I didn't know that.
And the funeral was at Grandma Parker's house. So, you know, here Elizabeth is in Lexington and burying a child, and it's from her grandma's house, not her dad's. And then
Ooh.
she lost another boy. I'd have to be in my notes. Anne lost two children in this time frame. One of them, a little boy named Lincoln, and I think the other one was Clark M. Smith II. Not sure on that. And I can't remember if Frances lost a child or not.
I'm thinking she lost a daughter.
Well, she lost a daughter when her daughter was 17, and that was in the 1870s or
Oh, okay.
early 1870s, 1860s, something like that.
Okay.
Because Robert came back to Springfield for the funeral.
Oh, are we ever going to have like a whole? Did we have a whole night on Robert? Was that with Jason?
So, well, it was supposed to be about the madness of Mary Lincoln, but it ended up being a lot about Robert. We are planning in August of next year to do a whole night on Robert because his birthday's in August. So that's kind of on our calendar. So the short
I've
answer
become
is
a
yes.
Robert fan. After our last rabbit hole post book discussion,
We've converted you into a Robert fan.
yeah, I mean, it was kind of like bar hopping that night. It was like different things. Now I'm going to go down my list, and if you have anything else to add to it, I just put more politics. The election of 1848, 1852, 1856, 1858, of course, which was the senatorial debates between Lincoln and Douglas. And I put on there, let's see, we got all the deaths. And I put on there Lincoln's descent and Lincoln's ascent.
Mhm.
The period before 1857 when he started getting back in, and then he gone down after Congress in the 1850s, and then what was it, the Dred Scott decision or compromise of 1850 kind of re-energized the man.
Mm-hmm.
I wish there was a reality television camera in their home at Springfield during 1850 to 1860. She was busy as a mother and running a household, doing, I mean, I complain about opening a can of soup, and I mean, she had to pluck the chicken. Lincoln was gone, riding the circuit. You know, all these things. I can't imagine how she handled everything. But having a husband coming home and not talking because of his own, what they called melancholy, depression, that had to be tough. Having raised 5 sons with severe depression and all these things from trauma and whatever, I can't imagine her living during that era when they didn't understand anything about depression and melancholia, as they called it then. They didn't even understand a lot of it when she went into the asylum.
No.
And they'd even made some advances by then, but not much. So that period, I think, that descent of Lincoln had to be utter hell on her.
Mhm.
Physically, mentally, emotionally. And, you know, he comes home and you know, she was probably like the cup waiting for the pitcher to refill because, you know, she got so much from the man. But she had to keep filling his sails with air during that time period. And man, when it bit him, I mean, you can just feel the energy in him, in his speeches, in his writings, and some of the other things that friends had said about him. He was moving upward. Now, here's the question I've always wanted to ask this group. Did Mary want to be First Lady, or did she want her husband to be president?
That's a good question.
Interesting.
I think it's both.
I've got to bug out. Good to see everybody.
Oh,
Okay.
are the bars already opening on your end?
No, she's going to watch the debate.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
We can
remember her
debate a
saying
lot.
she wasn't going to be able to make it, and I guess she decided to come during the pre-show. Enjoy it, Jeanette.
Hi, Jeanette.
If anything
Bye,
fun
Jeanette.
happens, come back and report. So we don't have to answer that. I don't even know if we can answer it.
She wanted to be Mrs. President, so I don't know. She talked about that,
Yeah.
Mrs. President. So you can't be one without the other. So,
Right.
Yeah.
you know, so
And once he won the election, the Evans pointed out, and it was affirmed by different people, she went on this huge shopping spree.
Mhm.
She wanted to show them that she wasn't from the sticks. And she
Well,
had all kinds of
Illinois
ideas.
was the West then.
yeah, that had to be hard on her, somebody who was raised in such societal status that, you know, she was being referred to as a country bumpkin.
Right.
So she had something to prove that this wasn't her first rodeo. You
No.
know, she had done this before. And does anybody else get the it's my feeling, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong on this, but I've always felt that Mary saw all these things being lavished on Mr. Lincoln. And then when she would go and they would say, just take the dress or take this, do you not think, and maybe in her little piece of her mind, she thought they were doing the same thing for her? You know, here, Mrs. President, you know, we want you to have this beautiful dress, without realizing that she was going to get a huge bill by the time it was all said and done.
Yeah,
What do you-
that's a good
and you-
point. That's a good point. In the whole time period back then, think about it. She had been educated. She was so highly educated. I think they mentioned there sometime place that she was one of the most educated women for her time, because it was very unusual back then. So she had been encouraged to use her mind and everything. And now she's kind of put off to the side. And this is
Yeah.
just bugs me, because this is, again, the lack of feminine rights back then and things like that. And women did take a second chair to their husband. And I think that's a good point, that I deserve this. This is
Yeah,
my
I mean, that's
reward.
just, you know, I guess it's me trying to defend her just a little
Right.
bit, because they talk
Exactly.
so much about her spend, 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 spend. Did she go overboard? Yes. I mean,
Yes.
there's no doubt in my mind she went crazy, but not to coin a phrase, but but yeah, I've always felt like, you know, they're lavishing all these suits and hats and wonderful things on her husband, and why not me? You know, I'm his spouse, I'm his wife, and I have to look nice too.
Mhm.
I've always wondered, when she went into some of these shops, let's say she goes to New York and she goes into the milliner's shop. I think this hat would look lovely on you. Oh, I do too. Here, let me wrap it up for you. I
Yeah.
wonder how many times there was no discussion of this is a gift
Yeah.
or this
Exactly.
is a purchase.
I think she was manipulated several
I do
times.
too.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I that elevation, I mean, now that is a big event. When you think about going from Springfield, Illinois, from the corner of 8th and Jackson Street to 1600 Pennsylvania, she had achieved her dream. Now, I wonder how much she paddled her boat in the realities of what it was really going to be like. That
What-
was
Go ahead.
Go ahead, you're fine.
Well, I'm sorry, once she got there, she had all these ideas. She had grand ideas that she was going to show them again, that she was cultured and everything else like that. And typical Washington society, they probably gave her one or two chances, if I remember the stories in there, and they just lambasted her and, wouldn't show up for things and things like that. And she was just so crestfallen because she had given her all. This was her trying to shine. And these people just didn't see it in her for whatever reason.
I was piggybacking on that. Well, when she went there as a congressional wife, hadn't she also thought she was going to make it into the upper echelons of DC society? And it's like, you're a junior congressman's wife. Get over yourself, lady.
No.
You're wearing your hoops a little bit too wide for, it's, I've always thought when she was a congressman's wife, that she was on the outside looking in when she really wanted to be inside. And when she got to Washington, she was on the inside, but she was looking out from the other side then. And looking at the people where, and then you've got Kate Chase.
Oh,
She was a stinker.
yeah, she was.
Back to when when Abraham was a congressman, I think one of the things that really surprised Mary is that she thought other congressional wives would be there, and they weren't.
No,
And
because
They
it
weren't.
wasn't just that
it's
she
a crappy
was
place to live.
included,
Washington.
she was on the outs because she was one of few.
Right.
And
Exactly.
she had her kids with her
Exactly.
Yeah. Had kids. That's good.
because they went to a boarding house.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we'd just been in the Globe. And now we're in another boarding house.
Yeah.
And now this was the boarding house, I think, her cousin was in before, when he was congressman before Lincoln.
Yeah, I think so.
Spriggs.
Spriggs, yes.
Yeah.
And, but I mean, there wasn't anything really to do in Washington at that time. And you've got two children, probably no nurse or anything. And I think she just went to the White House for one reception. Does anybody know?
No,
I don't know.
I'm not sure about that. She didn't stay the whole time. Didn't she end up going back to Lexington?
Yeah, she went back to Lexington. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
it
that,
was too hard.
okay, now that she gets to Washington, can you imagine what May of 1860 to November of 1860 on the election day was like for her? People coming to their house, just showing up and wanting to meet the rail splitter and all this other stuff. And she having to put her best foot forward with being the ultimate hostess. Reporters coming to write stories on him. Oh, can you imagine? She was in her heyday, I bet.
She was in heaven at that point.
Now, I wonder also, with the disruption of her world as she had known it. Now, there'd probably been a buildup from 1858 to 1860 with more people coming and going. But can you imagine that complete disruption of her world for those 5 or 6 months until the election, the tension? I mean, she was already a little anxious. Can you imagine her anxiety?
Amazing.
On that same note, all of this time up before, she's been, I don't want to really say dependent on Elizabeth, but she has turned to Elizabeth for various reasons. And now it's 1860 and Elizabeth and Ninian are not living in Springfield.
Mhm.
You know, they've gone elsewhere. And so Mary is doing this. I'm sure Frances was there to help. Although I really do not know what the politics of William Wallace were. You know, Clark Smith supported Lincoln, but I don't know about William Wallace.
I don't know that one.
I was
I
just,
don't either.
they were talking about all the receptions. There was like receptions, they had like 1,000 people. Really? And they were at their house, it said. Now, I guess they were all in around, but I know there's a picture in a lot of the history books of all the people standing out in front, and Lincoln standing there. He has like a white suit on, if everyone's familiar
Yeah,
with
that was a parade.
That was a parade. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I
Yeah.
mean, all the people just hanging around there, and I mean,
Because I think it
an
was,
idea.
The
I think it was-
receptions were generally done in shifts. You would get an invitation to come during a certain hour of
Okay.
time and then, and
That
so
makes
it,
sense.
that's
Sure,
how
yeah,
they
that makes sense.
to
Yeah.
get them through.
But it's still a lot of work. She would have had to
still a
have
lot of
had
work.
help.
and
Sisters helped it
financially,
a lot.
financially too.
Oh, yeah, costs money.
Well, you
I
can
don't
see
think
why most presidents leave the White House broke
Or-
because
Yeah.
of all they have to spend when they're in there.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they have to pay, you know, as little as people want to accept it, but they do have to pay for a lot more than we expect. You know, we look at them and we think they're getting it all for free, and they're not. You know, your family meals are on your budget. You know, anything you serve in your house for your family is out of your pocket. And if
You
it's
pay for
not
your toothpaste just like we do.
exactly, and if it's not if it's not a state dinner, then you know, if you're just having a party for Joe Blow, just
Right.
want to do a blowout, it's all on you. So I mean, we got to be practical with how
Right.
much they did spend, because they talk about the one party. I think it was right before Willie was sick. He was sick at the time. They had 500 people there, and they were going in shifts, and they lost the key to the dining room, and it was
February 5th.
it was a big pain in the tail.
Mhm. Now,
It was all on them.
oh, one thing that never mind. That's okay. New people. We're in the White House now. Or I'm sorry, the executive mansion. Who are some of the new people to influence her?
Her,
Elizabeth Keckley.
Keckley?
um,
Does anybody else,
the gardener Watson.
right? With Keckley, does anybody else put some kind of tender connection to Mammy Sally?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
that and she
You
had
know-
lost a son, and Mary lost a son
Yeah,
at the
and-
beginning of the war,
yes.
which I think that was what to me tied their union together, was the loss of their
Their
sons.
sons, yeah.
Donna?
What?
You've
were
been
shaking
awfully
your head no.
quiet, Donna.
Well, my dog has been barking, so I keep muting myself so you don't hear my dog going. Um, I have a completely different viewpoint of the Mary Lincoln Elizabeth Keckley relationship than most people do. I believe that Elizabeth Keckley thought of Mary as a very good friend. I think she cherished her friendship, and I think Mary saw Elizabeth Keckley more as a servant. Because when you read Mary's letters to Elizabeth, he's always asking her for something or saying, "Where's my dress?"
Or demanding something from her.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
"I sent for you, you didn't come. Get your butt here." That sort of thing. So I really, I think Valerie's stories or comparison to Elizabeth Keckley and the lady at the salon is spot on. Valerie, you want to unmute yourself and say that?
The lady at the salon.
Yeah, your hairdresser, your relationship.
Oh, yeah, I just said one time that, I go to my hairdresser, I talk with her, it's a friendly relationship, but I'm paying her for that time. She's not just cutting my hair and talking to me because I'm such a lovely person. She's
But Mary also bequeathed a lot of things to her after Mr. Lincoln was assassinated as well. So there had to be something there with their relationship.
I
Well,
just think that she was the woman that she could talk to, because think about it, once she was there, who else was there for her? Women need women to talk to. Sorry, guys, but
And all the other women really didn't like her.
Well,
Yeah,
you've
exactly.
got Elizabeth Dixon, you've got Mary Jane Wells,
right?
Mhm.
Taft. She was a teenager.
Julia
but
Bain.
still,
But
Julia
she was
Bain.
just-
Julia Taft.
Julia Taft, yes,
Taft.
and Mrs. Taft. I love Mrs. Taft's quote to Julia about not talking about the first lady.
Mhm.
Sally Orr,
Yeah.
she's still on friendly terms with Hannah because she's writing to her.
Mhm.
Well, and cousin Elizabeth stayed for 6 months.
That's true. She
Elizabeth
did
was
have
there for
people in and out of her life, I think. You're right.
Elizabeth Grimsley was very close to her. Actually, Elizabeth Grimsley was more of a sister to Mary than any of her sisters.
Yeah,
Mhm.
That's true.
Yep.
I agree.
She was.
And
What is it that made Elizabeth Grimsley and Mary so close?
She wasn't a sister for one.
Yeah, she wasn't a relative.
there,
I mean, that makes a lot of difference.
And she wasn't
I
a servant.
and she wasn't a servant, but but I don't know. I admire, Grimsley because
She was
I think
loyal.
she was very loyal to Mary in spite of a lot of the things that had gone on. And I see a good relationship. And she was there for Robert after her father, after his father died, and, at the funeral, she was there for him because Mary wasn't.
Yeah.
And, she was still in deep mourning and just couldn't do it. So Elizabeth pulled up the bootstraps when Mary couldn't pull them up.
And Elizabeth accepted Mary for the way she was.
Mhm. She did.
And that did, and I apologize because I totally forgot about that, but she was a very good friend to her. And that
Mhm.
was one thing that kept her going, I think.
Yeah.
well, and also you've got the relationship with Elizabeth's father because he becomes a surrogate. Dr. John Todd becomes a surrogate father to Mary when she's in Springfield, and especially after her own father's death. And I think Elizabeth, I can't remember what her age was, but I'm thinking she's really close in age to Mary. But I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm trying to look it up here real quick to find out when she was born.
I think I agree with you on that one. I can't remember. They're like a year or so apart from each other because I found it kind of interesting.
Mhm.
Because Elizabeth her own sister Elizabeth is far enough away in age that, they just weren't that close growing up.
Mhm.
There's what, six years difference between them, 6 or 7?
Yeah, because it was Elizabeth, Francis, Eli,
Levi.
and then Mary.
Mary.
Levi, not Eli. Levi and then Mary. So
Yeah, so I think that's a lot of it there. When Mary was a belle, Elizabeth was a belle. They're running around as single women together in Springfield.
Yeah, I'm going to go down the list of people for the White House years. Charles Sumner,
Yes.
oh yes.
the secretaries, John Hay, Nicolay,
Hellcat.
Stoddard,
Cat.
and
Mhm.
Stoddard. Emily Todd makes her appearance in 1850-ish when she visited Springfield, but then her return to the
Comes to
White
the
House
White House. Yeah.
Yeah, after
sets
her
a bigger
husband died.
stage for
After Ben was
Emily.
killed.
That
And
was
then
hard.
Lincoln's cabinet members, Stanton, Chase, Wells,
Well,
Vice
Stewart.
President. I never heard anything between Hannibal Hamlin, his first vice president, and Mrs. Lincoln. I read something she'd referred to about Hamlin, but that was it. So I don't know. Johnson, she just thought he was an alcoholic and just, I think she was afraid also that he was going to upstage Lincoln. He was a loudmouth. I mean, he was
He
brazen.
was a loud drunk.
Yeah. Now, also David Davis,
yes.
who makes an even bigger pass in her widowhood as the executor of the estate.
Yes.
Oh, did I get that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we have McClellan.
Mhm.
His cabinet, with the exception, basically, Hayes, I'm sorry, Chase and Stanton were the two probably that ruffled her feathers a little
most.
more, especially Chase because of Kate.
Yeah, that's true.
And poor Kate did have her, I read up on her one day and it was like, oh, it wasn't happy. Kind of served her right for goodness sake. And then the last person I put on my list was John Wilkes Booth.
I would add Benjamin French. The
Yes.
commissioner. Because he's the one who stood next to Mary at all the White House receptions and introduced the person to her.
Is there much about their relationship?
Well, his diary.
Ooh, Mr.
Hmm.
French. Family affair. I'm in a crowd that actually got that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course you've got, as we mentioned earlier, Mrs. Wells and some of the other ladies. Now, events. I'm just going to go down the list real quick and throw in what you want. Just the trip to DC, the Baltimore assassination plot. I'm sure that unnerved her.
Oh,
She was separated.
Yes.
And just the inauguration itself. I don't know if they had anything like Depends today, but that lady was probably peeing down her leg with all that excitement. That was just, I'm like, oh, thank God for hoop skirts. We can disguise this. And then just you just put a little chihuahua under the hoop so it looks like they peed there. The redecorating the White House. I belong to some White House groups, and oh my God, I am so sick of all hail Jackie Kennedy. I love her and everything, but I'm like, oh my God, she didn't build the White House, guys or girls. But think about this. She took on a monumental task. That was a big thing. It's a big house.
Well, it was in pretty poor condition when they
Right.
moved in, because they were going to tear it down and wanted them to live someplace else. And she fixed it up. She had all sorts of accolades for what she did and how much better it looked and in such and such. And then of course I never realized until I read the White Book on Grant, that Grant, they were going to tear down the White House when he went in, and he said, "You will not tear down my president's house." And I love that phrase, my president's house. You will make it livable. And I found a new whole respect for Grant at that moment. Not that it was bad. I found a new respect for him that I didn't.
Well, between 1866 and 1902, there were numerous attempts to rebuild the White House in a different location. Add to it, Caroline Harrison, Benjamin Harrison's wife, had elaborate plans. The Clevelands had elaborate plans. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them are like, ooh, I would have really dated it and everything. So there was always a question. They wanted to build a big mansion up on Meridian Hill, and use the White House for just formal functions. And there were all sorts of different scenarios that they wanted to use. But for her, coming in as almost a foreigner, if you think about it, to Washington society, which was still very much held by Southern aristocracy. She was up against a lot of social battles just in that. That had to have some bearing on her anxiousness with I mean, now I see her as very competitive. And Kate Chase, I'm sorry, I would have been stepping on her train at the end of her hoop at every reception. Did you see Kate? She's got a tear in her dress. She had all that facing her. Now, the reason I bring up the remodeling of the White House, she was going to be scrutinized to kingdom come on that. We've got a war going on, first of all. She's going to be making decisions of the new aniline colors in the carpeting, all these different things that, we don't have those here yet. Well, no, because they're European taste. I think the Eastern carpet even came from Europe, I think.
Brussels.
So that alone, her dress, her attire. Now, when I was telephone and letter pen pals with Irving Stone and his wife Jean, he had said he always felt it was vital that Mrs. Lincoln go to DC and do exactly what she did with being the best dressed, remodeling the White House, and a lot of refurbishing too, because it was I think it was Elizabeth that said it looked like one of the wardrobes had been split down the middle, or just things were threadbare. It got a lot of use, a lot of different use than it does today. And Mr. Stone said that here you've got the incomplete dome of the Capitol building, a shabby White House, Westerners coming in to live in the White House. The last time they had a Westerner was Andrew Jackson. Polk, they really didn't think of him as a Westerner, even though he was from Tennessee.
Yeah.
And then you've got the stump out in their backyard, practically, of the Washington Monument.
Oh, yeah. It was not
And he
finished.
said, yeah. And he said, when you look at this, when European nations look at this, and if they're trying to decide with whom they should throw their support, why would they pick the North? Capitol Building's dome, the Washington Monument, the shabby White House. And Mr. Stone, somewhere in my notes, his comment was, Mrs. Lincoln went in there knowing exactly what needed to be done. She was Lincoln's first general, and she got the job done. And then, diplomats started reporting back. The place is taking shape.
Mhm.
I love that image of Mary Lincoln.
The money was there. The two previous presidents chose not to use it to refurbish or fix up the White House. They figured it's there. It's in a pot. I'm going to take it. I'm going to use it.
And overspend.
Plus 7,000 more.
Yeah.
But it's like, what agency in the government then even didn't overspend?
No.
Yeah, yeah.
So I mean, but going on with my toward the end, when the creditors started coming after her, especially when they thought, oh, Lincoln's not going to win the
Mhm.
re-election, the carriage accident,
Yes.
Willie's death, the death of her brothers, the young soldier, was it Ellsworth?
Elmer Ellsworth.
Okay, oh, that's right. Douglas's death in June of
Yes.
1861.
Yeah, they died very quickly.
Yeah, I mean,
Other-
Good thing he didn't win the election.
well, people throw those things out, Pam, and I often wonder, because like Wendell Willkie was from my hometown, and
Mhm.
he ran against Roosevelt in 1940. I forgot the guy's name. Oh, Willkie died in 1944. And everybody's like, oh, well, he would have died in, well, we don't know.
No, you don't.
Circumstances are always different.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
true.
Yeah, you don't know why.
Yeah, Douglas
Yeah.
had been out doing a speaking tour to keep states in the union. If he
Yeah.
won the election, he wouldn't have been doing that, and maybe he wouldn't have gotten sick and died.
Right.
So who
right.
knows?
Good
Yeah.
point.
He
Yeah.
was trying to help Lincoln too,
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. That's true.
which is even more, says more about his character than
Yeah.
a lot of us give him credit for.
Yes.
Wait a
Is
minute,
the
I forgot.
fact,
Who are we talking about?
Douglas.
Stephen Douglas.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yes.
Yeah, the fact that he, once he lost the election, the primary and whatever, and went to run, he was Lincoln's champion. If I can't be
Yeah.
president, I can at least hold his hat. And I always love that kind of sentiment. I wish we had more of that today.
Yeah,
It
it would be nice, right?
I remember Jean Stone, Mr. Irving Stone's wife. She read to me, excuse me. She read to me one of her favorite moments in the book.
Future taxes.
And it was when, remember, it's historical fiction then. They were up on the inaugural stand, and she read it, and it was Lincoln was getting ready to give his speech, and he didn't have any place to put his hat. And Douglas stood up and said, "Mr. President," and held his hat. But in the Stone account, his fictional, Douglas looks over at Mary and smiles, but kind of I was that close. Yeah, I don't know if that happened. I think that was the imaginings of Mr. Stone, but I think that is such a beautiful moment between the Lincolns and Douglas. I like to believe that it did happen. Now, I have read the report that Douglas held Lincoln's hat, but that the three of them were like, look, and then what happened that night at the inaugural ball?
I was just going to say Douglas is the one that escorted her in.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, I mean, and then when they had their reception on the 5th of February in 1862, what did Mary do? I forgot what page that was on, but
Pays their taxes.
what did she do to her dress or her gown?
She got mad because she thought it was late and wouldn't
Yeah.
put it on.
Has to do with Douglas.
Oh, she put black lace on it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
Although some people believe that she put black lace on it for Prince Albert.
Oh,
yeah. Because that was about the same time, wasn't it? Yeah.
60, yeah, 61, he died.
December.
I'm
Yeah.
just going to be devil's advocate too. Okay, Douglas walked her into the inaugural ball, but he was the senator from Illinois where they were from. So probably the senator from Illinois would have done that even if he wasn't
Anyway.
Douglas.
Can we mute Valerie right now?
Just end this
Spoil it.
meeting right now, Darren.
It, it,
Which, I mean, you are right.
it seems that I have read somewhere, and I'm not sure where, that it was odd for her to walk in with Douglas because it was a different political party. So I don't know which one is correct. I mean, I think you're correct, Valerie, in saying that it's because he's from Illinois that he got to do that. But, you know, I wonder, I mean, at the next one, she walks in with a Republican from where, Michigan?
Who was that?
The second inaugural, who escorted Mary in that one.
Oh,
No.
I think it was the Republican from, I don't know for sure, but
I have no idea. I don't.
it's in my book. I'm sure it's in my book. I just can never remember what I wrote.
Okay.
Look, Fashionable First or the one you're working on? Do
FFL.
you want me to look? I'll look. Hang on.
I've got it here too.
Okay, some more events that influenced or had an influence on her. Press coverage. Now, I don't know, I've not researched this, but I wonder if she wasn't the first lady to receive so much press coverage. Julia Tyler received quite a bit for her time, but she was also used in advertisements. Oh, here's Julia Tyler with this parasol. Here's Julia Tyler in this dress and everything. So that they used her more for promotion than, oh, let's write these fun stories about her like we will in the future for Mrs. Lincoln. Now, again, I don't know. I'm sure Mrs. Madison had her share.
Dolly had quite a bit. Martha Washington had quite a bit. Abigail had quite a bit.
And by the way, I just found in your book, you say she was escorted by Sumner.
Oh, was it somebody on the
Oh.
second one?
Okay.
Okay,
And wasn't he a Republican?
yeah, from Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he was one of the radical Republicans.
Well, it
Now-
was one of those Ilm states.
I think with the press, I remember reading with her too that Mary did a lot of visiting to the hospitals, to the soldiers, and it's not put in the papers really. She
Mhm.
a lot behind the scenes, like writing letters home for some of these young men, and taking them things, sitting with them. And it really received scant coverage in the paper, but other things popped up again, like with the spending and different things like that. She
Right.
was criticized for having the party when they said, well, your little boy was sick. Why did you have the party? Like,
And soldiers are going without blankets.
yes,
Those-
so she didn't
Now-
have a very good press agent. I guess she didn't
Well-
have one at all.
Well, but Stoddard, one of the secretaries, told her, encouraged her to take reporters with her to the hospitals
She didn't want
so
to.
they could see what she was doing.
Yeah, right.
And
And
she said,
they
if I
didn't.
do that, she goes, it defeats the whole purpose of why I'm really
Yeah.
doing it.
She did it for the right reason. She didn't do
Right,
that ahead to get a news line, in the paper.
right,
And that,
right.
and that hurt her in the end, though.
Think about Wolf Blitzer talking about Mary Todd Lincoln at the White House. That would have been so cute.
Didn't
So-
Robert also tell Mary to take the press corps with her?
Really?
Robert,
Lincoln?
I'm sorry, what?
Didn't Robert Lincoln tell Mary to take the press corps with her to the hospitals?
No, I thought it was one of the secretaries. Stoddard.
Stoddard.
I think Stoddard did. And he was very upset that she wouldn't do that. He said it would help her reputation and, make her, look. And she said, I'm not going for the people. I'm going for my boys. And, but he thought she should go and have the press come with her. And she said, no, and I think I respect her for that because it was a private
too.
time.
Yeah, no, I
And-
do too.
That was that was a moment she could have provided
she-
some salvation for her reputation.
Yeah, I mean, it really could
And
have
she chose to go
shown her
the
in a
right,
different light, but it was a private time for her
right.
and her boys, because I always loved the fact that she calls them her boys.
Right.
And,
Now,
so,
a couple more things of events from that, the 1864 election. They didn't think Lincoln was going to win. I mean, it was
close.
pretty scary.
mhm.
Then, I think the one big thing toward the end was the episode with Mrs. Lincoln and Mrs. Ord
Oh, yeah.
at the review.
Yeah. John Virginia.
That, in some ways, even though we're at the end of the war, everything's, that could have been so easily covered up, but it wasn't. I've always wondered how much Mrs. Grant
Right.
had to do with that story staying alive and afloat. Now, I love Julia Grant. I'm really good friends with her great-great-grandson. Not that that means anything, but and I live 50 miles from where Grant was born. So there's that part of me here that really likes the Grants and Mrs. Grant. But Mrs. Grant was another Mary Lincoln in waiting.
Mhm.
She was a very highly intelligent woman, as was Mary. And I think there's a lot of similarities between
Yeah,
the
Yeah,
two.
they
of
were
them.
too alike.
Yeah.
And that was when the next big redecoration of the White House went on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know White said in his book that everybody thought Mary thought she was a queen until they met Julia.
Exactly.
And then
So-
Julia just kind of put a whole crown on the whole thing.
Now, does anybody have reason not to suspect that Julia knew what her destiny might be like?
I think she saw it with Mary, especially, well, that one carriage ride when Mary berated, what's her name? I can't think of.
Right, Mrs. Ord. That's what we were
Ord.
talking about.
Yeah,
But-
yeah.
I mean,
So-
by 1864, Grant has shot up. He's a star. Mary didn't like him. He was a butcher to her.
Right.
Yeah.
But Grant was the most popular man
Yeah.
on the continent.
Yeah.
She was
And that
worried
really-
about him.
It really
And-
irked her, though, the fact that her husband was the one who led this whole thing, hired the right people, found the right people to do this. How many houses was he offered throughout the country after that,
Yeah.
after that moment?
Oh yeah, they were
I
feted
mean-
all over Europe.
when
Received by the
she
Queen.
was in Europe, he came there and he didn't even pay a visit.
Mhm.
And I
that-
mean, there was a lot of slaps in the face and, from the Grants, and I don't know if it was reciprocated or whatever, but I've always thought, they kind of, I don't know. But I know it really bothered her that, her husband, she couldn't even hardly get a pension worth that she could live on.
Yes.
And here he is getting houses wherever he
Yeah.
wants to get one.
Yeah.
And I think it really upset her just on the principle of my husband died for this country
Country, yeah.
and he's getting all these rewards.
right,
Mhm.
and in her eyes, I mean, yeah, every soldier's widow got a pension.
Yeah.
Well, her husband was in charge of all those soldiers. But boogers. Just
But the
like-
war was over. That was their excuse. The war was over when he was
Right.
shot. So it didn't
But
matter.
look at the attitude of former presidents, and even the first ladies then. You had the Adams lineage who were present until about the 1870s, 1880s, the grandchildren of John and Abigail. And then one of the next big names that came up was Robert Todd Lincoln.
Yeah.
So now Mrs. Lincoln is a widow. what? How, I'm just going to read the note here. How or did Mrs. Lincoln influence the memory or legacy of her martyred husband throughout her widowhood? Did she hurt it?
Elevated it to martyrhood and sainthood.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Did she damage it in any way with some of the issues that went through? I mean, the old clothes scandal,
I think,
all of her.
I think Robert thought it was going to, or that it was tarnishing the Lincoln name. Um, Maybe so, but I don't think it hurt his name because
No.
all it did was push him higher up.
He was a man.
Yeah,
Well, yeah,
And didn't,
yeah.
and right after he died, didn't she really, work to get the, the site in Springfield?
Yes.
Oh,
she
yeah.
did. That's right. She demanded it be there. They wanted to bury him in Washington at one point, and then other places in Springfield. And
they offered Washington,
yes,
but she
But then-
wanted Oak Ridge.
right. And then if they
Right.
didn't do it, she said, "Okay, I'm going to take him wherever," and then they kind of backed off.
But
They
wasn't that
wanted
what
him
the
in the center of
Lincoln's,
town,
yeah, the
That's
Mathis
really
property?
Yeah, the Mathis
the
property.
Mathis
Mather,
property.
Mather.
Matter. Yeah. Mhm.
Mather.
How dare a widow want to decide where to bury her husband? The
Out
nerve.
there,
Yeah. How
the
Yeah.
about that? Right.
Because you've
And
got
he
all these men on the Lincoln,
Yeah. Like they
What,
didn't get
burial
to ask
commission?
her. Like, duh.
yeah. But that was the one time when she was bedridden at the White House that she really
Yeah, it's-
returned
Right.
to who
That
she really
roused her.
was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that roused her out of that. Yeah.
It got her off of her morning bed and into the fight because it was pretty much you either do it my way or he's going to be buried in the place. I guess they had made a crypt for what was it,
Washington
Washington?
and yeah.
And
Yes.
they'd
She
offered
would
that
take him
to
back
her.
there. Yeah.
And she
Mhm.
said, we'll just bury him there if you can't abide by his wishes, because this is what he wanted. He
Right.
wanted to be buried in a park-like setting.
Yeah.
And that's what we're gonna
Quiet
do.
place.
Or he's going to be in Washington where everybody can revere him. She didn't want kids running around his monument and throwing things in the center of town. That's all she could see was picnics on, by his grave or something. So
Well, also, a couple of things. One is the Mather location was, if she had gone back to Elizabeth's home, all she would have been staring at, looking out
Would
the
have been that.
window, would have been Lincoln.
Exactly.
too.
Oh, that's true.
Exactly.
That was one problem.
Where was it located?
Right next to Elizabeth Edwards' property
Right.
Oh,
yeah,
up on the hill. And so, but the thing that I find interesting in my research is, John Todd Stewart was involved in the Lincoln Monument Association that was going to bury him,
Mhm.
in Mather Square. And Robert is sending all of these telegrams to cousin John going, please consider my mother's wishes. Won't you please, mother's insisting on this. And
Yes.
John Todd Stewart is responding more or less with, well, we're doing what we think is best for the city, because they want to turn it into a tourist.
Duh.
Right.
And Robert is fighting and fighting. Of course, we have to remember when Robert leaves Springfield, he's what, 16 years old?
Yes.
yes.
And so he's this young punk kid. And now he's, 4 years older and he's still considered wet behind the ears. And suddenly Mary's cousin, John Blair Smith Todd, Dr. John Todd's son, sends a telegram to John Todd Stewart that basically says, I don't care what we have to do, make it happen. Do what Mary wants. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, no problem.
A man has spoken.
Yeah,
Well,
that's true.
an equal, because at this point, John Blair Smith Todd is a general and there is a high ranking officer in the military.
Oh, okay.
And, he was with Lincoln when Lincoln died.
Mhm.
And he was very much part of the funeral arrangements and everything. And he became Mary's champion.
That's good. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
another connection to, the Dr. John Todd family, not just Lizzie, not just Elizabeth.
Good point.
Very good. What happened to Darren?
Oh, there he is.
Bladder.
I was gonna say, did you have to take a potty break?
I didn't have hoop skirt on to cover it,
Oh,
For a
leave that
chihuahua.
puddle on the floor, huh?
Now, I had another question for the group that,
So you missed all my original research I just shared.
about the Blair Todd guy.
Oh, yeah. Okay, you heard it.
The bathroom is just next door.
And plus I when I Zoom, it's on speakers. So,
Oh.
So
yeah.
the whole house can listen.
Well, the neighbors too. I mean,
Might as well share.
well, I got to be careful because I turn my other speakers off because I have all my speakers on Bluetooth. So if I go to another room, I can listen to whatever I'm listening to. But my students will drive by and they'll pull up. My house is right next to the high school, and they'll come in and they'll find my Bluetooth and connect to it. And I get Halloween sounds during Halloween season.
Fun.
If Ohio State University wins a game, I get Carmen, Ohio blaring through the house.
Oh my God.
It's fun. Okay, there was one thing that Evans said for William Herndon, Mrs. Lincoln's, and I threw the word eccentricities in because I couldn't remember, and the stories that contributed to some of her eccentricities and things like that made it so much easier to blame her for a number of areas, especially the Lincoln marriage, as being miserable. Evans, for me, when I first read Evans a million years ago, before Jason was probably still a toddler with his teething ring when I was reading it, he made so before all the papers and notes and everything of Herndon were released in what, 50s, I think it was 54. For some reason sticks in my brain because I know Mr. Stone did not have access to him yet. Evans was already combating Herndon. Herndon deemed himself as some kind of psychoanalyst or something, and thought, oh, well, this must have meant this. The whole Anne Rutledge story just makes me want to barf. But that's a big rabbit hole. But I think what good historians have had to do over the past 80 years, put out the fires of Herndon. They spread like wildfire. Everyone wants to know the shit. No one wants to know, well, look at what she did. She went to the soldier, did all this. No, they're going to go for all the
I want the shit.
stuff. It's going to be
all the negativity. That's what everybody.
Well, that's
says
what
about
people
that.
feed on. Yeah, sure. We said that before. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
right. So, who was the greatest influence on Mary Lincoln?
Her grandmother, a lot, I think. Her dad, a lot. Henry Clay, a lot. She enjoyed her talks with Henry a lot.
But if there was one person,
Abraham.
Yeah. If you want to talk later in life, but you have to have your formulation at
Right.
some time.
right,
Sure,
and we
but-
already covered that, who had influence and pretty much why. Now, what was her biggest influence on Lincoln?
Her influence on him?
Her biggest influence on him?
She gave him culture.
Yeah. And she gave him the thing like, you can do this. You can do this. You have it to do. You can do this. And she helped him with culture and everything else. And I think, again, we talked about the diamond in the rough and everything. And it just started clicking with him there. I really do.
I feel a lot, to me, there was a lot of, not self-doubt, but I don't think he trusted himself
No.
very much at the beginning of his career. He liked being a lawyer. He dabbled in politics on the state level. And then all of a sudden, there was something Mary put in him that made him think he could go higher. I don't know, maybe I'm reading more into her than I am
Yeah.
into him.
Now, there was
Right.
one reference. I had jotted it down. I don't know where my one set of notes from original. I felt Evans alluded to something about Lincoln knowing that if he were to marry Todd, that would elevate him socially and politically, that it wasn't just one of those "oh shucks" kind of moments, that he knew what he was doing also by marrying into the Todd Edwards clan of Springfield. This would be your turn to talk.
Say that again. Make sure I understand.
Okay. That Lincoln knew that marrying Mary Todd would upgrade him socially, possibly economically, but more so politically, and that he wasn't any dummy.
He wasn't dumb.
No, he's anything
You know
but
what I
dumb.
mean.
He was brilliant.
shrewd. He was shrewd.
He was the smartest man she ever knew.
But I think Abraham married Mary because he loved her, and those other things were just a bonus. I don't think those are reasons why he married her. Because he could have gotten those other things. I mean, he dated Frances, Mary's sister.
Mhm.
He could have married anyone in that family and have gotten those things. And other women in Springfield as well.
What was it the most that attracted Lincoln to Mary?
All the things they had in common, their love for poetry, their love of politics, they thought on the same, their love for Shakespeare. They thought along the same lines on many things, even the way they wanted to rear children.
I've always added into that mix the loss of their mothers.
Right, that was just what I was going to say. That's what Evans gets at, like
Yeah.
the interlocking psychology of,
Sense of loss.
I find it so moving.
That
Yeah, that
mutual
was good.
connection. Oh my gosh, we both, you were 9, I was 6.
Right.
And when Lincoln's mother died a month before Mary was born. Now, if he ever said that, and my mother died in 1818. Oh my gosh, those little connections. And the reason that makes is my oldest son that I adopted in 2000 made the comment one day. He said, "Dad," he was 12 when I got him, and he goes, "Do you realize," he said, "your dad was 23 when you were born. And you were 23 when I was born." Now, to me, that was like, oh, yeah, connections. And all those little connections. Oh my God. I get it. I don't get starstruck, but there's a lady named Amanda Wright here in Dayton, Ohio, and her great granduncles are Wilbur and Orville Wright.
Wow.
I could pee down my leg every time I see her in a card store or something. I mean, I'm just like, now think about Abraham Lincoln. Oh my God, Miss Todd knows Henry Clay. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine that? I mean, to him, that's like, oh my gosh, Kevin Bacon's not born yet. That would just be so exciting for the guy.
Hey, guys,
Wow.
I've got to cut out. My dog needs to go to the bathroom and Papa's gone on a walk. So I got to go tend to the dog. He's screaming at me.
But
So,
you can come back. I
Okay.
mean, it's not like
well,
you.
I'll check back in and see if you guys are still
Oh,
not down a rabbit hole somewhere.
Just keep your window open. We'll have fun.
All right.
So,
I'll just leave it open.
so
I'll be back later.
what was probably the one thing where she had the greatest influence? Not where she influenced, but where she had the greatest influence.
Are you talking about on Lincoln's life or in life or anything in general?
On Lincoln's life.
In Lincoln's life. I would say socially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
What
I
about,
just think all those political aspirations, were there in him. I mean, he's running for office before he ever meets her. So he had those, but he didn't know how to dress. He didn't. I always go back to the story of him throwing open the window at the home and yelling out, Mary will be right down. She's putting her trotting harness on. I mean, you just didn't do things like that in polite society.
or go to the door with your vest unbuttoned?
Or your socks and no boots.
Right.
And no boots, and his socks, or in his slippers.
But the political, I think, the political side there, but the one thing I keep always going back to is she gave him security
Mhm.
and the motherly love that he had lost
Mhm.
now and again with Sarah Bush. But I mean, she was security. And there's another word. They talk about it with ish when we adopt kids, they say it's an S word too. Not stupid. Security and
Stability. Yeah.
stability and there,
Thing- They
it's
were
like
synchronized, sort of.
there's structure. I mean, and when he left the home in which he shared with Mary, he went to his office where there was some structure, but from all accounts, it was his man cave.
Different. It was different, yeah.
Yeah. And I think we could go on and on and on and come up with all kinds of little, many different ways she influenced him. But I think right
Respectability.
there,
She gave him respectability, basically. Because when he came there, he was a hayseed. Intelligent hayseed, but he was a hayseed. And she gave him respectability because of all the things that she was and all the things that she went through. They had things in common, but he could look back and say, I married a Todd from Lexington, Kentucky. And I think that was her biggest thing. Now, that doesn't sound maybe as important to some people, but that helped him. And he took that and took the next step.
mhm. And I can imagine one of my favorite drawings of Lloyd Ostendorf is on Christmas morning, shortly after they've been married, and he's got his arm around her, and they just look like they just got off one of the best rides at Cedar Point or Kings Island. I mean, they both look so happy. I believe when they went out for that last carriage ride on the afternoon of April 14th, 1865, they were that young couple again. They'd been through a lot of hell in 22 years. But I look at that afternoon, and she talked about it. She wrote about it. That meant so much to her, but that was really their last moment together.
Their last goodbye.
Yeah. And I think there was a moment where they stopped the carriage and got out and walked through the flowers or something. Maybe it was just in Hal Holbrook's Lincoln. But that image of them just getting out and stepping out of the carriage into the flowers. We've had a lot of rough rows to hoe, or whatever he said between the war and the death of our darling Willie.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think he said, we've got to both be happy now.
Yeah. He said, we've been miserable. That's what he said.
Yeah.
We've been miserable.
But then to think, I like to think that when he said that, he smiled and she smiled. And they were that young couple traipsing through the parlor, I guess, at the Globe, smiling at one another, happy. We can go on now. Is there anything else on Mrs. Lincoln's influence that you can think of?
What did people think of the book, if we're not going to say anything about that? What was everyone's thoughts of the book? I'm sorry, I'm a retired librarian.
That's fine. Well, what was so funny was the night Jason was on, I think Donna even said, oh, and Jason wrote the foreword to this. I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, and so I thought it was a new book. I didn't realize I was ordering another book, but I've got like one of a 1940s edition that I used years ago. And I'm like, oh, I got a new book. And I started reading it. And I'm like, wait a minute, this is the same doctor from Chicago that wrote another book that I read. I didn't know he was still alive. I mean, I felt really stupid because I ordered actually two books that I already had, but oh well.
So good.
So yeah, what did folks think of the book?
It is a wonderful resource.
Yes.
I love the fact that I can use it and it's considered an original source. I like the way that he was able to get into a lot of newspaper archives that no longer exist. So that's, actually going to Lexington and doing that digging, because I've been through some of those same archives, and between then and now we've had the 37 flood. There have been fires in the courthouse.
Oh, wow. So they're all gone. All that stuff's gone.
Some of them are, not all
Oh,
of them.
wow.
Some of them. So that's why his book is considered original source material.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I like the fact, for me, what I liked was the lack of bias.
Mm,
It was research.
mhm.
Yes.
She was a study, just like any of his patients. And he did it from a psychological, scientific, and historical approach. It wasn't, well, she was, no. He gave us the facts. The facts as he had them available to him at the time, because that, he was still up against Herndon and White. So, I mean, that was, that he had to really hone in on a lot of details of Mrs. Lincoln's life that others had only assumed prior to that. Oh, well, I heard it from so and so. And I don't think Evans included anything that wasn't based on fact. Where it's like, oh, well, so now if Catherine or Emily had told him something, well, they were closer to the original source. And sometimes I am very hesitant with some sources because what's their axe to grind?
And how good are their memories?
Bingo.
You know, that's a lot of the Mariah Vance books. That's the issue with that book, is that's when they get so upset about, because, you know, you can't read it with any justification because it was written so long after the fact. And then it wasn't even translated until 20 years after that. I mean, it's just a mess. And I can't imagine anybody would want to read that and believe that it's factual. But I do get a kick out of the fact that she refers to Mary Lincoln as that woman all the way through it. That woman. It's like,
well,
what?
Mr. Ostendorf, I love the guy. God bless him. God bless his art pens and everything. But, you know, I don't know. He was starting to age quite a bit when he was working on the Mariah Vance before it was published. That one book of his. That wasn't the Mr. Ostendorf that I originally met, because I'm like, dude, this doesn't really. And he was, oh yes, this is. I still have a great amount of respect for him because he really was an advocate of Mrs. Lincoln. He loved portraying her in the drawings with Lincoln. He wasn't always kind with what he wrote, but his artwork for me stands more firm than what he wrote as a historian. Okay, what do others think? I know there wasn't two of us who read the book.
Well, the only thing that bothered me, it was very good research. I was very impressed, all the lists of resources, because again, you know, that was my job. But like, again, I'm looking at it now from a woman in 2020, and the section in there where he was describing her physical things and her low forehead, and it was almost like he was doing phrenology or something.
Yeah, like he was dissecting her.
Yeah, and I'm like, who are you to judge this woman, you know, just because she wasn't considered pretty, you know, like Kate
I think
Chase.
she was fairly attractive.
Yeah, I mean, but you didn't get that from him though, if you read that.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
You don't get that
it
from
just
any
annoyed
males that have written about Mary Lincoln. Herndon didn't, you know, there was, I
Yeah.
think he was just mad because she rebuffed him.
Maybe, I guess. And the other thing too, he totally kind of discounted the effects of her migraines too, because she suffered with them. And back then they didn't understand, you know, the medical profession really didn't understand about that. You know, we talked about the wires being pulled by Indians and things like that. And I had migraines. I don't know how many you have. I know I used to
I get them. I still get them. I used to get
Yeah.
them a lot more frequent, but
and they're
first
horrible.
I find curious because they seem to have come on with what would have been her cycle, and they tended
Yes,
to
it's
started to
hormonal.
subside as
Yeah.
when her cycle might have been ending. So
Yeah, that's what
they
he
might
was
have just
saying.
been horrible migraines which is what that was during my time, but I still get them.
Yeah,
But-
that's what, and he did mention that, you know, and he said, but, you know, again, a lot of times people looked at her because she was like in a room laying down. or-
Yeah, in a dark
she'd
room
tell
because
the-
her eyes hurt.
Yeah, I
Hello?
mean, you know, it was just, you know, so I felt bad about that. And again, like the physical description thing, that just annoyed me really, you know, but again, that was all part of his scientific thing, but
He
again,
had a
today,
small,
we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do that.
enormous bosom.
But it was
Yeah.
also 1930.
Yeah, it's different.
I-
time.
I have a couple
Yeah.
of friends that they don't care for the book because it's very Freudian. And, you know, and I said, but that's what it was when he was writing. That was all he had to go on was Freud.
Right. That you have to realize when he wrote it. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You know,
And
no.
sometimes that's frustrating because
it
we
is.
know that,
we know
We know
more
more
now.
now.
Yeah.
no, well, and that we know that non-historians will take that and go, oh, and not consider the things we've discussed,
Mhm.
how
Yeah.
we've dissected everything about her. Now, when I started researching her in 1986, I think it was, I'd always been a Lincoln lover. I Mrs. Lincoln, I thought she was a shrew like everybody else. I was doing a project for one of my classes, and I was writing like a brief oratorio, a 20-minute oratorio on Lincoln for orchestra, choirs, and soloists. And I wrote a very sarcastic love song ballad, Love is Eternal. So I started researching it, thinking, okay, what was she like? And as I started, it was like, oh, poor Abraham Lincoln, married to Mary Todd. 6
Oh,
months
yeah.
later, when I finished reading everything, I was like, oh my God, poor Mary Todd married to Abraham Lincoln. I'm like, that poor woman.
Yeah, I mean, he was just as hard to live with as she
Yeah.
was, I'm sure.
Right.
I mean, there's no
Yeah.
doubt in my mind that somebody who, like you said earlier, comes home from riding the circuit for several, for a month or so, and walks in and has nothing to say
Yeah,
to
that
his
would drive me
wife.
Yeah.
It had to be heartbreaking for her to know that she wasn't even missed. It doesn't even
No.
feel like there was a hug or an embrace or
Yeah.
let's go slam boots together. I mean, whatever. Yeah.
I like that. Oh,
You just don't get it.
no,
There-
you don't, and he made Evans made some comment about Lincoln too. I don't know. I pick up the weird things about his melancholy and his moods, and it's because he was constipated. Did you remember?
Well, yeah, they that's also in Portrait of a Marriage. Epstein talks about his constipation and the drugs that he was taking because he thought he might have syphilis. There was a lot of stuff, and it's like when I was reading, I was listening to the Portrait of a Marriage, and I went to Sam Wheeler and asked him a question because there was something in there that it really went. I jerked my head and pull my car over and get the book out and find the page to see if I heard it right. And it was like, oh my God. And he said, and he looks at me and I asked him the question and he says, are you reading the Epstein book? I said, yes. And he says, oh my God, it's so full of falsehoods. It's ridiculous. He says, be careful with that book. He insinuates a lot of things that are not true, but yeah.
But it just those are just a couple things. Like, I mean, again,
Mhm.
book all in all, it's a very good resource, copiously documented, firsthand. It's the thing to use if you're going to do something on Mary Lincoln. I mean, something further. But
Mhm.
again, it would be nice if it would be like, I don't know, not revised. What am I trying to say?
Updated.
Yeah, and again, you can't go back. You can't play Monday morning quarterback with this kind of stuff. I mean, he wrote when he had it, and this is what I found now, 1932, and take it. And I'm sure he didn't think that here in 2020 we're going to be sitting here discussing this.
And discussing a second pandemic.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, that just really fascinated me. I'm like, oh my God, he's still with us. And it just seemed I'm like, oh my God, I learned this as we're going through a pandemic and we're discussing Mary Lincoln. And it was like, I just felt like, I don't know, his spirit was channeling us or something. I don't know. Okay. Anything else?
real quick, I'm just going to say that I'm going to stop the recording at this point. We can absolutely keep talking. Just because I stop the recording doesn't mean the discussion has to end. But I'm going to stop the recording
Because
I
we
think,
know it won't end.
no, it won't. But I think 2 hours and 20 minutes of recording is enough.
Oh
That's
my
good.
God, it has been.
So
Yeah,
thank you
that's
everyone for watching the
amazing.
recording.
Thank you, Valerie.
Yeah,
Thank
and here I'm going to stop it. So do I want to stop the recording?